Section 221, criminalizing introduction of gun or abortion bans. So this is the truce. This is the part where everybody gets something, everybody makes a compromise or concession. And so in exchange for codifying the Hyde Amendment, the agreement is no introduction of abortion bans for the next 10 years. In exchange for getting universal background checks passed, no introduction of gun bans for the next 10 years. This is the truce. And if we Americans can work it out, how do we enforce it? And so Section 221 is the enforcement mechanism. It says that in the House and the Senate, it will not be in order for any joint resolution, amendment, motion, conference report. You can't consider any of these things if it would amend or repeal the codification of the Hyde Act, if it would amend or appeal the universal background checks, if it would prohibit the manufacture, sale, or possession of a firearm, then it could not be considered. Or if it would prohibit or restrict access to abortion, it could not be considered. And this violation would be a Class B misdemeanor, punishable by between 5 and 30 days imprisonment, be a criminal act to violate and break this truce. That concludes my testimony for Section 221, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I do have a question. Is this constitutional to make it a crime for a member of Congress to introduce a certain type of bill?
Well, I guess as far as I know, it's never been tried before specifically, but I believe, and again, I'm not a lawyer, but I believe it's constitutional. According to Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2, says that each house may determine the rules of its proceedings. So the first part of this section is the part that says you're not allowed to introduce these things. And so the Constitution says the House and Senate can make whatever rules, and if they want to pass a rule or a law that says you're not allowed to introduce these things, the Constitution gives them the authority to do that. We saw an example of this recently in December of 2021 to increase the debt ceiling, and the Senate needed to be able to pass it without it being filibustered. And so they passed a law that said the certain piece of legislation could go directly to the floor and couldn't be filibustered. And the House and Senate both agreed that that was how the rules in the Senate would work. And once it was law, how they worked. And so we can use that same mechanism to say, by law, you can't mess with these sections of the United States Code or introduce things that would restrict or prohibit guns or abortion. So that's the first part. The second part of the question is, can you punish? Can this be a criminal offense and not just a procedural rule? And so the answer to that question is yes. Back in 1906, the Supreme Court ruled in Burton versus United States that Congress has a power to make it offense against the United States for a senator or representative to do certain things. In this case, it was a law that the Senate had passed that said if you're a sitting member of Congress, you can't get compensation for services. There's certain businesses and things you can't do. And Senator Burton did it anyway. And so they convicted him of that. And we can do the same. So that same principle, again, Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2 says that each house may punish its members for disorderly behavior. And so if we define Section 221 defines that disorderly behavior, and they can decide that they should be punished. Will this be challenged in court? Be shocked if it wasn't. But again, the Supreme Court has said that the House and Senate have the power to do these things. So you could also look at it as an opportunity for civil disobedience. If you're a member of Congress who believes really strongly that guns should be banned or abortion should be banned, you could try and introduce one of these things and then take your 5 to 30 days in jail as an act of civil disobedience. I think that would be, I think that you could look at it that way. So I guess that's my answer. Yes, I believe this is constitutional.
Thank you. We do have a question from Tony in California. 1 in 4 Americans see abortion as a key voting issue. For a politician to see this position as valuable, the swing voter bloc has to be greater than the turnout these issues produce at the ballot box. Do you think it's possible for any Democrat or Republican politician to be able to embrace this plan?
I hope so. It's definitely the purpose. But yeah, so as we talked about, if you're looking for a reason to throw this whole package out, you can find one in Title II. And this is how legislative packages work. Is there's a whole bunch of stuff in them. Most of it's good, some of it's not. And again, speaking as a former legislator and observing what they do in Congress, if you want to make it work, if you want all the good things, then you accept the bad parts and support the entire package. And so politicians, any member of Congress has had to do that already. So they have the ability to look past parts that they don't like in exchange for being the most transformational Congress in 80 years, the Congress that ends poverty, ends mass incarceration, and ends the endless wars. But to the specific question of, all right, so 1 in 4 Americans see abortion as a key voting issue. And they say, well, if and maybe they're not satisfied by just codifying the Hyde Amendment. Maybe they would like to fight over the Hyde Amendment for the next 10 years. But they really, really want the idea of a federal ban on abortion to be considered in the next 10 years. And so they're like, look, congressional candidate, if you support this, then we won't support you. And so Tony's question is, well, then that calculation is your block of swing voters has to be larger than the people who that are single issue voters on this. And so this is where being a block of swing voters really comes into play, because what are the alternatives for someone for whom guns or abortions is their single issue? They can refuse to vote for the candidate of the party that they most closely align with, but they're not going to go vote for the other candidate because that would be even worse. So they could just refuse to vote at all, and then they'll be the spoilers, leaving the American Union to be the deciders. So if going to guns, right? If there are Democrats who like the idea of universal background checks and like the idea of no abortion bans for 10 years, but are unwilling to say that we can't consider any gun bans for 10 years, what are their alternatives? They can go vote for the Republican, or they cannot vote at all. They'll be spoilers, leaving the American Union as the deciders. So we're leaning into this. The two-party system is what we have. The Republicans and Democrats win 99% of the time. We can make the most of it by unionizing as swing voters. So I think that's how Republicans and Democrats who want to win their races and earn this block of swing votes can persuade themselves that the package as a whole is worth supporting.
Thank you. Yes, and I have another question that's relevant, that's topical. If the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, strikes down Roe v. Wade, how would that impact this?
This really wasn't written with that sort of scenario in mind. 60% of the American people, 60% of voters don't want to see Roe versus Wade overturned, but it could happen. So this section specifically prohibits the introduction of new restrictions on guns and abortions. So to reduce restrictions, to increase access to guns and abortion is not prohibited under this section, which means that if the Democrats were in control and Roe versus Wade was struck down, they could pass a law to try and undo the court's decision. Similarly, if Republicans were in control and they wanted to ease restrictions on some type of gun or something like that, this section wouldn't prohibit that. It only stops the threat of the other party will take your guns or abortion away if they get elected. You've got to vote for us. We're the lesser of two evils. It just takes away that argument. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, that helps. So specifically, so this is we keep saying truce on guns and abortion, but specifically, more accurately, it's no new restrictions on guns or abortions for the next decade. That is a more accurate description.
Correct. And
Okay.
so, yeah, and like maybe as we address these core issues, these societal problems, maybe in 5 or 8 years or something, like, look, things are going great. Maybe we don't even need all the restrictions we have now. And so they would be able to loosen restrictions, but not tighten them for 10 years.
The libertarians probably really like this.
There's something in it for everybody.
Yes.
Everybody will come out ahead if this ends up on the president's desk.
Fantastic.
Another really short one. Section 222 is one sentence. It says Section 221 is repealed 10 years after the date of enactment. That's it. So after 10 years, the restrictions, the criminalization of certain introductions, that will go away after 10 years. And this is reminiscent of what the framers did with the Constitution. They couldn't deal with slavery at the time, so they said, all right, no restrictions on the slave trade for 20 years. Just as a side note, that was a compromise to push it back to 1808. Originally, the committee had recommended the year 1800, and then they compromised and said, all right, we'll make it a nice round 20 years. And so again, we're not doing what the framers did, which was kicking the can down the road and ignoring the underlying problems. This isn't trying to put a Band-Aid on the issues around guns and abortions as much as it is trying to heal the wound underneath, reduce the demand for abortions, reduce the drivers of gun deaths. And if we can heal the wound, then the Band-Aid will have done its work. I think I mixed my metaphors there, but
the Band-Aid can come off.
Yeah, the Band-Aid can come off. Yeah. So, all right. Next year, I think that concludes my testimony for Section 222. Again, these are polarizing issues, but reasonable, rational adults can work things out. Compromises are how relationships work, and we, the American people, need to have a better relationship with each other. And so, yeah, this is a good faith proposal to try and put our differences aside temporarily to solve some core problems.